Hello everybody and welcome to part 5 of my Star Wars Legends Chronological review series. I'm sorry that this one is coming very late, very long overdue, but today we are going to go ahead and jump straight in from where we left off in part 4, and we are going to cover all 5 issues of the Dawn of the Jedi Prisoner of Bogan comics. Alright, starting off with issue 1. Issue 1 basically starts with Zesh on the moon of Bogan. He's been exiled there for a couple of months now, and he's basically just contemplating his life's recent events. While on the moon, he meets Dagan Locke, who is a Jedi who was banished to Bogan a while ago, and we've actually heard of him before in the comics. He was at the end of issue 5, and he also was mentioned in the Dawn of the Jedi Into the Void novel. Now basically once he meets Zesh, he basically tries to take him under his wing and tells him how great he was. He helped fight in the Despot War, he helped end that war, and he also tells him the story about he and his buddy Hawk Rio and how they went down into the abyss, which we saw in the issue last time, and they went deep enough, and basically Dagan had a vision that an army was coming to attack Tython, and he also saw a vision of someone wielding a sword of flame. But basically, since going to the abyss was forbidden, he's been exiled ever since. And so Dagan notices pretty quickly that Zesh has a sword of flame, it's his force saber that we saw last time. And so then Dagan is basically like, "Jesse, we have to make a new force saber to convince the Jedi that my vision is real, Jesse." And Dagan leads Zesh to an old broken down ship on the moon, but Zesh is able to use force lightning to power it back up, and they leave. Back on Tython, the 3 Jedi journeyers that we followed last time, Seknos Wrath, Shea Koda, and Tasha Rio, are training in martial arts with the Jedi Master Tave, who we met back in Dawn of the Jedi Into the Void. And basically the 3 are worried that they aren't being taken seriously enough by the Jedi Council, and they really feel like that they could have helped Zesh more if he had stayed on Tython. So back on another part of the planet, on a temple named Akar Kesh, a Jedi Master named Kitu comes to meet with another Master named Raji Vari. And basically Raji Vari's older, and Kitu wants to ask him for guidance on the current situation that's going on with Zesh and everything. Raji Vari basically tells Kitu that the visions of the young Jedi should not be ignored, and that if they do ignore those visions, because the visions could be really important and they might come straight from the Force, then if they ignore these visions, and because the visions are very significant, then it could be the end of the Jedi as they know it. So going into issue 2, the Jedi Master Tem Madog, who is basically the guy who makes all the Jedi weapons, their metal swords, he can't figure out Zesh's force saber. The Jedi have Zesh's force saber now. He didn't take it to Bogan. But even though Tem Madog can't figure out what its power source is or how to destroy it or anything like that, Hawk Rio uses his dark feelings to activate the lightsaber. The lightsaber, or the force saber, takes the dark side in order to activate, and he decides that he's going to keep it on him so that they might be able to figure out more about it. Next up, we see Trill, who is the Force Hound for the Rakatan, as she is hunting down Zesh and Tython herself. And we see her reflect on her past. We find out through flashbacks that she was broodmates with Zesh. Basically, they grew up together in the Rakatan slave quarters, and she has another flashback of when they're a little older and they have an honor fight under the Rakatan, and Zesh beats her fair and square, but instead of killing her, which is the custom, he spares her and offers that she become the Force Hound for their leader, Skal Nass. And basically because he dishonored her by sparing her, she feels a lot of resentment towards him. After that, we see Tasha Rio discover a holocron along with another Jedi Master named Terz Senden. A holographic figure mysteriously emerges from the holocron, saying that it will help guide Tasha if she asks. The other Jedi eventually discover that Zesh and Dagan are both missing, so they end up splitting into 2 teams to find him. Once they go to Bogan and they discover a carving on a rock wall of Dagan holding a force saber, Hawk Rio reveals what he knows about the vision, and he reveals that he himself had the vision along with Dagan, but basically he was able to leave his exile by pretty much gaslighting himself and believing that his vision didn't mean anything and Dagan was just insane. And once they figure out Zesh and Dagan's plan, they end up splitting into their teams, and they go to the industrial planet Nox, which we saw in Dawn of the Jedi Into the Void, and they also go to the crystal planet called Krev Koer. Issue number 3 opens with Tasha Rio communicating with the image of a long-dead Jedi Master named named Master Anang. And basically Master Anang recounts to her how his people from the planet Dathomir, which are named the Qua, were able to travel across hyperspace using technology that they call infinity gates. Now remember that at this point in the timeline, hyperspace technology or anything like that isn't really widespread. The holocron then identifies a skull that is presented to it of a Rakatan individual who was recovered from Zesh's crashed ship, and out of fear, the holocron deactivates. One of the Jedi teams go to Krev Kor and they find Zesh and Dagan, who are looking for the crystals that they need to make their saber. After a brief fight, one of the Jedi is disabled after Dagan uses a force power called Mind Twist in order to convince her that she is on fire, even though she isn't. After dueling Zesh, Seknos Wrath falls off a cliff and everyone thinks he's dead. After that, the team regroups on a planet called Kalimar, and it is revealed that Seknos Wrath is actually alive. He was saved by Trill, and pretty much Trill just convinces him that she's a lowly thief. Nobody knows that she's a force hound or anything. She's just pretending to be friendly. Dagan and Zesh are done on Krev Kor, so they decide to go to planet Nox so that they can actually create their force saber through alchemical means. Going into issue 4, the Jedi are beginning to close in on Zesh and Dagan. And Dagan tries to strike a deal with some of his old enemies from the Despot War so that they can raise an army in order to confront the threat that he saw in his vision. But before the group can reach any kind of an agreement, Hawk Rio shows up and chases Dagan down, and now that they both have a force saber, because Zesh and Dagan were finally able to make one, they have the first lightsaber duel. Dagan tries to appeal to his old buddy, saying that they had the same vision and they're now even wielding the same swords that Dagan saw in his vision, but Hawk just continues to say that the Abyss had driven Dagan mad and that the only way that he was able to leave Bogan was because he used the time there to make himself better. So at the same time this fight is going on, Shae Koda is able to track down Zesh, and they have a very intense fight as well. And Shae Koda is really upset because she thought that she and Zesh and her friends could all get along, and basically she had vouched for him at the Jedi Temple, and now she feels like he betrayed her. And then basically out of nowhere, this giant monster comes out of the sewer water nearby and drags Shae Koda down into the water. Against his instincts, Zesh decides to fall to the light side and saves her. Seknos Wrath is able to contact the Jedi and let them know that he's alive. He gets through to Hawk Rio, and Hawk Rio tells him that Dagan was able to escape capture and he's on his way to his homeworld of Shikakwa in order to gather his army. So back on Tython, the Jedi Master Rajivari is able to communicate with the holocron and get a bigger picture of the story that it was trying to tell Tasha. And basically the Jedi Master in the holocron tells him that the Rakata used their old technology of the Infinity Gates as well as the Qua's knowledge of the Force in order to build their empire. Here it is also mentioned that the Rakata hyperspace travel technology is built off of the pain and the suffering of Force-sensitive individuals. Basically, the holocron finishes by saying that if the Rakata end up making it to Tython, then they're pretty much screwed. After having learned all of this, Master Rajivari basically tells all of the Jedi to prepare for war because Dagan Locke's vision might actually be coming true. Issue number 5 then follows Zesh and Dagan with Shae Koda as their prisoner on their way to Shikakwa in order to negotiate with Baron Rio on making their little army. It's here that we learn about Dagan Locke's role in the Despot War. Basically, he was a Jedi spy for the Despot Queen and became her lover, but because of his duties, he had to strike her down and kill her. And basically that deception is what allowed the Jedi to win the war. Trill and Seknos Wrath are eventually able to regroup with the Jedi, and they all converge on Shikakwa, and everyone gets involved in one huge brawl. Hawk Rio ends up confronting Dagan one-on-one again, and they basically have the same argument that they had before, that, Dagan is crazy, but Dagan says that Hawk Rio is ignoring destiny and yada yada. But essentially in their climactic battle, Hawk Rio gets distracted and Dagan Locke cuts off his leg with the Force Saber. Shae Koda arrives and basically pleads the case to Zesh that he needs to choose who he wants to be and that he doesn't have to be a pawn for the Rakata or Dagan Locke or whoever. He needs to learn how to stand up for himself and be his own person. And upon hearing this conversation, Dagan Locke tries to tap into Zesh's mind in order to use his Mind Twist ability, but Zesh's mind just has so much darkness in it that even Dagan Locke is repelled. And basically he becomes incapacitated after that, and the Jedi are finally able to capture him. Dagan is brought back to Tython as a prisoner, and Hawk Rio shares the full extent of his vision with the Jedi, saying that it was Zesh he saw wielding the Force Saber, leading the Jedi into battle. Because of this and just the recent events in general, Zesh is allowed to train under the Jedi, and he shares the secret of the Force Sabers so that they can make them for the coming conflict. Meanwhile, Trill contacts her Rakata masters and tells them to prepare for war as well. Alright, that's about it for the story content. Let's move on to the review. To be honest, I didn't really feel too strongly one way or the other about this comic arc. It honestly just feels like it's here to hold together the first arc and then the third arc, with the first one being the start of the story and the one to introduce everything, and the last one being what I'm assuming is going to be the culmination of everything and this final battle that it seems to be leading up to. Just feels like a lot of exposition and setup for things that are about to happen and are really going to pay off later. My favorite part continues to be Zesh and his character development. I think it's pretty apparent that he is eventually going to somehow become his own person or become more aligned with the Jedi and the light side. His arc seems to have a very clear starting and end point, but we'll have to wait and see exactly how it all pans out. One of my favorite parts of this arc specifically is the relationship between Zesh and Dagan. It feels very Walter White, Jesse Pinkman-like. I apologize for making a Breaking Bad reference 2 videos in a row, but I really liked Dagan at first. I thought he was really nuanced and interesting, that you think he's evil at first, but he ends up being right about a lot of stuff. It's just the methods that he goes about it is not very savory. He is very much a dark side person, but he kind of does it for the right reasons. We see throughout this arc and in the next one, because I have read ahead a little bit, that he very much is in on it for the glory and the recognition, but he ultimately wants Tython to win and for the Jedi to win and for pretty much the good guys to be safe. And I think that's a really interesting angle for like a villain character, especially because he ends up being right in the end, because the Rakata are coming to invade. I do think that towards the end of this arc, though, he does kind of just evolve into more of a power-hungry stereotype who is willing to manipulate the more naive characters into getting what he wants. Also, let's talk about the Force Sabers here. The Force Sabers, as we've discussed, need to be activated by the dark side, the user's rage, anger, pain, what have you. And I'm totally seeing this as one of the things, maybe the thing, that ends up really biting the Jedi in the butt later on and potentially causing this great upheaval in their philosophy that they need to balance the light and the dark, because one of the biggest themes of Star Wars is that ultimately the dark corrupts. You can't master both the light and the dark side, because the light side is selflessness and calm, and the dark side is selfishness and anger and fear, and you can't have those two coexist forever. Eventually one is going to overpower the other, and I really feel like the Force Sabers are a really interesting way to visualize that. And I don't know why, I'm really hoping, I'm really excited to see the Jedi kind of fall on their butts and have to learn to redo their philosophy. I think that's one of the things I'm really liking about this era, is how the Jedi have to learn to adapt their beliefs in order to survive. The rivalry between Hawk Rio and Dagan Locke was really interesting and really fun to see unravel. These old friends who have long since been enemies, who are now rehashing their old arguments. It was a really interesting character dynamic, seeing how they both dealt with the dark side. How one dove pretty much face first into the dark side, and the other one learns how to deal with it and try and balance it the best way he knows how, is really interesting examples of how two people can sort of deal with the same trauma or the same event. All of the side characters, characters who were introduced in this arc or ones that had not been too important, they all got their time in the spotlight. Most of it was focused on Dagan and Zesh and Hawk and Shay Koda, but all the other ones like Seknos Wrath and Tasha Rio, they might have been strewn about all over the place, but even the most minor characters seemed to have something to do and some relevance to the story, and I appreciated that. But can we talk about Trill and Zesh for a second? Because I didn't really notice this or realize this until this arc, but they have face tattoos that are Aurebesh symbols, and Aurebesh is the Star Wars alphabet, if you didn't know, and they correspond with letters. Zesh, they could find Zesh and he's just one of a kind, but then they meet Trill, and Trill basically stays on Tython with them. She's their ally now. I don't know if I mentioned that in the plot summary. And so how do they not connect these two? They're both named after letters, and they both have letters painted on their faces. And of course, Zesh has like this whole memory blank thing going about the Rakata, which we'll get to in the next video. That's cleared up a little more later. But like, how do they not connect the dots there? That's something I would like to see resolved. I don't know. The one thing that I do know for sure is that this arc does a fantastic job of setting up the next 5 issues, and I'm really excited to cover those in the next video. But yeah, that's basically it for part 5. I think I'm gonna go ahead and give this arc 3.5 Bogans out of 5. It's not the best part of this era, but it definitely held my interest. I didn't fall asleep or anything while reading the comics, and you know, it does a fantastic job of setting up more background for the characters, and I'm sure that it's going to go in a really interesting direction going forward. Like I said, next video we are going to be covering the 5 issues of the Dawn of the Jedi Force War comic arc. You know, like, subscribe, comment, you know, the same song and dance. You know, I love any kind of support to feed the YouTube algorithm monster. But whatever happens, whatever you want to do, thank you so much for watching this one. May the Force be with you, always.